So, I want you to imagine a language algorithm that has just like completely lost its training data.
Oh man, like it's totally wiped.
Exactly. I mean, for decades, it knew exactly how to categorize certain words, like a joke went into one bucket, a
Right.
threat went into another, and violence had this very strict physical, legal
It
parameter.
meant physical harm.
Yeah, exactly. But then the algorithm gets flooded with new inputs from modern political discourse, and suddenly the whole system just breaks down
The
entirely.
definitions become completely subjective.
Yes, they change meaning entirely based on, well, who holds the microphone and who's being targeted.
It's all about context now, or lack of it.
Right. And that broken algorithm is essentially where we find ourselves right now. I mean, in 2026, a very prominent political figure demanded that a late night comedian be fired over a roast joke.
Over a joke.
Yeah, labeling the punchline a, quote, despicable call to violence. Yet, just a year prior to that, that exact same politician issued sweeping pardons for over 1,000 people who literally physically breached the United States Capitol.
Talk about a contrast.
So today, for you listening, we are looking at the exact moment the definition of violence in American politics just sort of fractured.
And it is a profound fracture, right? I mean, it forces us to ask whether words even still have objective definitions anymore.
Or if they're just weapons.
Exactly. Or if they've merely become weapons of convenience.
Right.
Because when a joke is treated as a physical threat, and an actual physical attack is treated as something to be officially forgiven,
Right.
the entire framework of how a society governs itself is kind of called into question.
Which is exactly why we are diving straight into an essay that attempts to map out this exact breakdown.
It's a heavy one.
It really is. We're looking at a piece dated April 28, 2026 by Eric Reinhardt, and it's titled The Sacred Difference: Comedy, Violence, and the First Amendment.
It's a great title, honestly.
Yeah. So, for you listening, our mission in this deep dive today is to basically deconstruct Reinhardt's core argument.
We want to see how it works.
Right, we're going to examine the architecture of how he contrasts the reaction to late-night comedy with the response to real-world political violence.
But before we get too deep into the weeds here, we really need to establish our analytical baseline.
Oh, absolutely. This is crucial.
Because Reinhardt's essay is intensely focused on highly charged political events,
Very charged.
specifically involving Donald Trump, his rhetoric, and the events of January 6th. Which means we need to be very clear about our role in this deep dive.
Yeah, let me just state this up front. Our objective here is strictly to dissect the rhetorical strategies the author uses.
We are not here to take a side.
No, not at all.
Right.
We are not validating Reinhardt's political conclusions, and we're not offering a defense of the politicians he critiques either.
We're just the guides.
Exactly. We are acting as your guides to impartially map out the mechanics of his argument. How he structures his case, the contrasts he draws, and the legal thresholds he's trying to establish.
Right. We are looking at the blueprints of the essay, not, moving into the building.
I love that. Okay, let's unpack this blueprint. The author anchors his entire thesis on an inciting incident that, well, on its surface, seems relatively trivial.
Just a late-night television monologue.
Yeah. Jimmy Kimmel tells a joke about Donald Trump, who at this point is nearing 80, and his wife, Melania, who is 23 years younger.
And Reinhardt doesn't pretend this is some gentle, self-deprecating quip, right?
No, he doesn't hold back. He categorizes it explicitly as a dark and sharp roast joke.
Which is a very deliberate move. He's starting his argument right in the mud.
What do you mean by that?
Well, by conceding right out of the gate that the joke is sharp, dark, and potentially offensive to its target, Reinhardt basically strips away the whole subjective debate about taste.
Oh, interesting. So he's saying taste doesn't matter.
Right. He is establishing that the aesthetic quality of the comedy, whether you personally find it hilarious or completely repulsive, is legally and constitutionally irrelevant.
He just isolates the mechanics of the joke to set up the reaction it provoked.
Exactly.
And the reaction is really where the author finds his primary friction point. Because Trump doesn't just call the joke unfunny.
Or mean-spirited.
Right. According to the essay, he escalates the categorization entirely. He calls it a, quote, despicable call to violence.
And demands that ABC and Disney immediately fire Kimmel.
Yeah. And that specific phrase, call to violence, is what Reinhardt just latches onto, right?
Yeah.
It's a massive semantic leap.
It is. It's a deliberate categorization error. And Reinhardt spends the first major section of his essay just attacking it.
How does he break that down?
He deconstructs the fundamental difference between the structure of a joke and the structure of criminal incitement. He points out that a late-night comedian is not issuing policy.
Right, it's comedy.
Exactly. A joke is inherently a subversion of reality. It relies on absurdity or exaggeration or irony to even function.
So because of that, it can't be literal.
Right. Therefore, it cannot be interpreted as a command, an instruction, or a physical threat.
He actually uses this series of really punchy negations to build this wall around the comedian.
Oh, I love that section.
Yeah, he writes that a joke is not an assassination instruction. A punchline is not a mob.
And a monologue is not an insurrection.
Right. It's almost as if he has to explicitly state the obvious because the political rhetoric has blurred the lines so severely.
He really has to spell it out.
But let's play devil's advocate for a second here.
Okay, let's do it.
Because I think for you listening, this is where the modern debate actually lives.
Yeah.
The author draws this incredibly hard, almost classical line between speech and physical action.
The old sticks and stones argument.
Yeah. But couldn't a critic argue that in the modern digital age, where a late-night clip is instantly aggregated and clipped and beamed to millions of highly polarized followers, a comedian's rhetoric does have the potential to indirectly incite harm?
That's the counter-argument, yeah.
Does the author's strict binary really hold up when the audience is that massive and volatile?
Well, what's fascinating here is the exact tension the First Amendment was designed to navigate. And Reinhardt leans heavily into that constitutional history to answer that exact question.
So he addresses the scale issue.
He does. He argues that the scale of the audience or the volatility of the political climate does not alter the fundamental nature of the speech.
Okay, wow.
In fact, he asserts that the First Amendment exists precisely for these high-stress environments.
Like it wasn't built for easy times.
Exactly. It wasn't written to protect polite disagreements over tea. It was designed as a robust, almost aggressive shield, so that public figures, especially those wielding the immense power of the presidency, are subjected to relentless public scrutiny.
And ridicule and parody.
Exactly.
So it's almost like the author basically views the First Amendment as a societal pressure valve. Or actually, maybe more accurately, a massive shock absorber.
Oh, a shock absorber. I like that analogy.
Yeah, like if we think of our democratic republic as this heavy, fast-moving vehicle, it's inevitably going to hit massive potholes.
For sure.
It's going to hit tasteless satire, deeply offensive comedy, and blistering personal attacks.
And if the suspension system, the First Amendment, is rigid, the entire vehicle shatters upon impact.
Exactly. Every offensive comment would trigger a constitutional crisis. So Reinhardt is arguing that we have to let the shock absorbers take the hit, no matter how jarring, so the chassis of the republic survives.
That's a great way to put it, which is why he drops that memorable line in the essay.
Oh, remind me.
He says, hurt feelings are not a constitutional emergency.
Yes, that line is so good.
And notice the rhetorical trick he's pulling off here, too.
What's that?
By framing the politician's outrage as mere hurt feelings, he totally diminishes the power of the accusation.
I see.
He refuses to engage with the premise that a joke could be a call to violence. Instead, he diagnoses the reaction as a symptom of a bruised ego attempting to weaponize legal terminology to silence a critic.
Wow. So he just sets the baseline right there. Political satire, even the tasteless, offensive kind, is fully protected. It's the necessary friction of a free society.
That's the foundation of his argument.
But, and this is a big but, this creates a massive structural requirement for the rest of his essay.
It really does.
Because if he is going to establish such an unyielding, absolutist defense of offensive comedy, he has to definitively answer the obvious follow-up.
Which is?
Okay, then what is the limit?
Right.
If the author draws such a hard line protecting offensive comedy, how does the piece define the threshold where speech actually crosses over into danger? If a dark joke about a politician's family isn't a call to violence, what is?
And what's really striking is that Reinhardt doesn't answer this with a theoretical legal textbook definition.
It doesn't.
No. He answers it with a location and a date.
Oh.
He pivots sharply away from the comedy clubs of Los Angeles and takes us directly to the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021.
So he moves from the comedy stage to the U.S. Capitol to define actual political violence.
Yes. It is a structural pivot designed to give the reader a case study in actual, undeniable incitement.
He takes the false positive, the accusation against the comedian, and uses it as the dark background to project his definition of a true positive.
Precisely. And he starts by outlining the weeks of rhetoric leading up to January 6th.
Just setting the stage.
Yeah, noting that the president had been systematically pushing a narrative of stolen election. He's laying the groundwork, showing that the speech that day didn't just happen in a vacuum.
Right, it was the culmination of a sustained campaign of grievance.
Exactly.
And then he zeroes in on the specific language used at the rally on the ellipse.
The exact wording.
Yeah, he quotes Donald Trump directly. He says, quote, "If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore."
And the essay really highlights this vocabulary. Words steeped in theft, strength, combat, and existential loss.
But he doesn't just analyze the words on the page, does he?
No, not at all. He analyzes the context, which, as we know, changes the legal weight of speech entirely.
Right. Context is everything. What's the context he emphasizes?
The context is the crucible of the argument here. Reinhart emphasizes that this crowd wasn't gathered for, like, a standard midterm campaign rally in an empty field.
Right. They weren't just at a fairground.
No, they were directed toward a specific building where a very specific, constitutionally mandated event was taking place.
The certification.
Exactly. He reminds the reader of the extraordinary vulnerability of that exact moment. Nearly all 535 voting members of the 117th Congress were physically present inside the Capitol to certify the Electoral College vote.
The entirety of the legislative branch gathered for the peaceful transfer of power.
That is the powder keg the author says the rhetoric was thrown into.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The author is juxtaposing a comedian's punchline with the president's rally speech.
Right.
Does the author argue that the rally speech itself was the violence, or that the violence was the inevitable result of the delayed response?
Oh, that is a great distinction. And this is where Reinhardt's argument gets highly sophisticated.
Because he doesn't just stick to the speech, right?
No, he doesn't just argue that the fight like hell speech itself was the isolated catalyst. He moves from the rhetoric of the speech into the rhetoric of silence.
The rhetoric of silence. Wow.
Yeah, he heavily scrutinizes the president's behavior once the physical breach of the Capitol actually began.
So he's looking at what happened after the speech.
Exactly. This is where he moves from the concept of a singular call to action to a sustained mechanism of complicity.
How does he map that out?
Reinhardt maps out the timeline, asserting that the public record demonstrates the president spent hours watching the attack unfold on television,
Right.
resisting pleas from his own staff and allies to intervene. And the essay hinges on a very specific timestamp.
Which is?
He notes that Trump did not issue a clear, unequivocal instruction for the rioters to leave until approximately 4:01 p.m.
Okay, so let's dissect the mechanism of that delay, because this is where the author is locating the true definition of a call to violence.
It really is.
In a volatile, mob-driven event, a delayed response from the only figure with the authority to disperse the crowd isn't just an absence of action.
No, it's not neutral.
It acts as a tacit endorsement. When you have told a crowd to fight and then you watch them fight for hours without telling them to stop, the silence itself becomes the instruction.
Exactly.
So is Reinhardt arguing that the 4:17 p.m. timestamp is the ultimate proof of intent?
He is arguing that the timeline is a singular, continuous act.
Oh, I see.
You cannot separate the initial grievance language from the hours of permissive silence that followed. He writes that it was a sitting president directing rage toward the seat of American democracy. And by contrasting this rolling, hours-long event with a 2-minute late-night monologue, the author makes the accusation against Kimmel look utterly absurd.
Because the scales are just so entirely different.
Right. A joke is a closed loop. You tell it, the audience laughs or groans, and it's over.
Yeah.
What happened on January 6th, according to the text, was an open-ended authorization of chaos.
And she paints a visceral picture of that chaos. I mean, we are talking about lawmakers hiding under desks, staff barricading doors, and police officers engaged in medieval hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah, it was brutal.
And then right at the crescendo of this legal and political argument, Reinhardt does something really structurally fascinating.
He shifts gears completely.
Yeah, he brings the momentum of the essay to a complete screeching halt. He shifts from an analytical voice into this profoundly somber, almost liturgical tone.
It's a very noticeable shift in the text. He intentionally pauses the political narrative because he recognizes a risk inherent in political essays.
What's the risk?
The tendency to abstract violence into a sterile debating point.
Yeah, just turning it into statistics or talking points.
Right. He explicitly states that before anyone can sanitize January 6th with politics, the reader must confront the absolute, irreducible human cost of that day.
He forces a confrontation with the biological reality of the violence.
Exactly.
And he does that by saying their names.
Yes.
For you listening right now, consider how the author uses these personal, human details. It completely shifts the tone of the essay from a legal debate about a late-night joke into a somber memorial.
It grounds the entire theory in human lives.
Right. We have to respectfully recite the 5 specific names the author honors here. Officer Brian D. Sicknick,
Officer Howard Liebengood,
Officer Jeffrey Smith,
Officer Gunther Hashida,
and Officer Kyle DeFreitag.
and he is meticulous about detailing the nature of those losses in the essay.
Yeah, it's not just a list.
No. He notes that one officer died shortly after engaging in the physical defense of the building, while the other 4 took their own lives in the days and months following their service during the attack.
And including the suicides is a vital part of how Reinhardt forces us to redefine what a casualty of violence actually means.
It really is.
Yeah.
It prevents the reader from drawing a neat, clean box around the hours of the riot itself.
Right, like the violence didn't end when the sun went down on January 6th.
Exactly. The author writes about the officers who survived the physical clash, but went home carrying what he calls invisible wounds.
That phrase is so powerful.
He describes trauma that lodged itself in their bodies, in their sleep cycles, in their families, their faith, and their nervous systems.
And the inclusion of the phrase nervous systems is just brilliant rhetoric, isn't it?
It is. He is actively contrasting the physical destruction of a human nervous system with the concept of a politician's hurt feelings over a joke.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It exposes the asymmetry of the original complaint.
It's like he's challenging the reader to weigh the discomfort of being mocked on television against the reality of a police officer experiencing night terrors or severe PTSD because they were crushed in a doorway by a mob.
Exactly. It's not even a comparison.
But the author doesn't just focus on the trauma they endured. He focuses on why they endured it.
Right, the purpose behind it.
What exactly were these officers bleeding for? Reinhardt makes a point that completely undercuts the partisan framing of the entire event.
This is a critical thematic point from the text.
Yeah.
He argues that the police lines weren't holding the perimeter for a political party.
They weren't defending Democrats or Republicans.
No. He states they were defending a process. They were acting as the physical manifestation of the Constitution at that exact moment.
The peaceful transfer of power.
Exactly. By defending the certification process, they were defending the machinery of democracy itself, ensuring that the transfer of power could survive a physical assault.
Which really elevates the officers from just being victims of a riot to active defenders of the Republic's most foundational mechanism.
It totally reframes their sacrifice.
So if the author establishes that trauma, the shattered nervous systems, the loss of life, the attack on the constitutional process itself is the true metric of a call to violence, how does he reconcile the political system forgiving that exact trauma just 4 years later?
Well, this leads us right into the final and frankly most aggressive section of the essay.
Yeah, he jumps the timeline forward.
He does.
Oh.
He brings us from the trauma of January 6, 2021, up to the political reality of January 20, 2025.
Inauguration day of Donald Trump's return to the presidency.
Exactly. And Reinhardt introduces a specific, undeniable policy action to synthesize his entire essay.
What was the action?
He states that on his very first day back in the Oval Office, Trump issued a sweeping clemency proclamation for those charged or convicted in relation to the January 6 attack.
And the essay lays out the raw math of this decision, and the scale is just staggering.
The numbers are huge.
According to the text, this clemency affected roughly 1,500 to 1,600 people.
Wow.
Yeah. It included full, absolute pardons for over 1,000 of the rioters who breached the grounds.
Over 1,000.
And it specifically noted sentence reductions for 14 leaders of organized militia groups.
And by presenting these numbers, the author is not just citing historical trivia, you know.
Right. It's not just data.
He is finalizing the trap he set at the very beginning of the essay. He takes the two halves of his argument, the Kimmel joke and the January 6 pardons, and he pushes them together until the hypocrisy becomes absolutely impossible to ignore.
It is a devastating juxtaposition. Let's really walk through the logic the author is presenting here.
Okay, let's look at it.
You have a leader who publicly demands that a comedian lose their livelihood over a verbal joke, claiming it is too dangerous to be tolerated in society.
Right, a call to violence.
Yet that same leader watches a violent mob assault the legislative branch of the government, waits hours to tell them to go home, and then, upon regaining the highest executive power in the land, uses the stroke of a pen to completely legally absolve the people who carried out the physical violence.
Well, it's a massive contradiction. And Reinhardt doesn't mince words when describing this dynamic either.
No, he goes hard.
He refuses to analyze the pardons as like a savvy political strategy or some means of unifying a fractured base.
Right.
Instead, he diagnoses the behavior through a lens of profound moral failure. He attaches 3 specific, really heavy labels to it.
What are the labels?
He calls it an act of authoritarian fragility, an example of political cowardice, and ultimately hypocrisy on a historic scale.
I really want to dig into that phrase, authoritarian fragility.
It is a good one.
Because it feels like the key that unlocks the entire psychology of the piece. Usually we associate authoritarianism with iron-fisted strength, right?
Yeah. Dictators projecting power.
Exactly. But Reinhardt pairs it with fragility.
Right.
He's suggesting that true power can withstand mockery. An insecure leader, however, projects strength by subverting the rule of law to forgive loyal foot soldiers, while simultaneously displaying hypersensitivity to a comedian pointing out an age gap.
The fragility is in the inability to handle the joke.
Right. And the authoritarianism is in the pardoning of the mob.
Precisely. It is a perversion of the executive pardon power. I mean, historically, sweeping clemency like Ford pardoning Nixon or Card pardoning draft dodgers was often framed as a way to heal a divided nation, regardless of how controversial it was at the time.
Yeah, like trying to move on.
But Reinhardt argues that the 2025 pardons were not about national healing. They were about rewarding loyalty to the leader over loyalty to the constitutional process.
Wow. And this is really where the title of the essay finally comes into full focus, right?
Yes, the sacred difference.
So what does this all mean? How does the author use the word sacred to finalize this argument? Because sacred is a heavy, almost religious word to drop into an essay about constitutional law and late-night comedy.
It is heavy. He uses sacred to elevate his conclusion from a legal argument to a moral absolute.
Okay, explain that.
He is stating that the difference between a comedian subverting reality for a laugh and a president inciting a movement, watching it turn violent, and then pardoning the attackers, is not a matter of degree.
It's not just a subtle gray area.
No, it's not something that can just be debated on cable news. It is a sacred boundary.
A sacred boundary.
Yeah. To confuse the two, to treat a roast like an insurrection, and to treat an insurrection like a minor trespassing violation worthy of a blanket pardon, is a violation of the foundational truth required for a society to even function.
He basically closes the essay with a sentence that acts as a final verdict.
What's the sentence?
He writes, quote, "A joke is not an insurrection, but pardoning insurrectionists tells us exactly where Donald Trump stands."
Powerful closer.
It really is. He is ultimately concluding that a politician's true character and their actual intent regarding the safety of the republic are never revealed by their complaints about the media or comedy.
Oh.
Their true intent is revealed entirely by how they treat the people who commit violence in their name.
It's a masterful piece of rhetorical engineering. Reinhardt takes the reader on a complete journey here.
Yeah, he really does.
He starts by forcing us to examine the mechanics of comedy and the protections of the First Amendment.
Right.
He then drops us into the harrowing physical reality of the Capitol attack, demanding we acknowledge the somatic trauma of the officers who defended the building.
The invisible wounds.
And he concludes by using the 2025 pardons as the ultimate proof of a shattered moral compass.
It really forces you to step back and look at the broader implications for how we communicate. If we think about the architecture of this essay, the underlying warning is really about the weaponization of language.
For sure.
The words free speech, incitement, and violence are losing their objective weight. They are becoming elastic.
Stretching to protect political allies.
Exactly, and contracting to crush political critics.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that is the mechanism the listener needs to take away from this analysis.
What do you mean?
Well, when a political movement attempts to redefine a joke as violence, they are not trying to protect the public from danger.
Right.
They are trying to create a pretext for censorship.
Ah, I see.
Conversely, when that same movement redefines an actual violent assault on a government building as something to be pardoned and celebrated, they are using the concept of free speech as a shield for criminality.
Wow.
The essay demands that we look at the application of these terms, not just the definitions.
Which takes us right back to our original thought experiment. The language algorithm is broken.
It's completely wiped.
Yeah, the map we use to navigate acceptable political rhetoric has been deliberately distorted. And this leaves us in an incredibly precarious position as a society.
It really does.
Because if the boundary between a sharp joke and a dangerous threat, or the line between an aggressive protest and a violent riot, is going to be subjected to endless bad faith partisan debate.
The whole system just gets paralyzed.
Exactly. The institutions designed to protect us rely on those boundaries remaining relatively fixed.
They have to be fixed.
So here's a final provocative thought for you to mull over as we wrap up today's deep dive.
Let's hear it.
We know that the friction of free speech, even the deeply offensive, shocking, tasteless speech, is a vital necessity for a democracy. The shock absorbers have to work.
Right, the vehicle has to keep moving.
But if the people in power are actively confusing the shock absorbers with the steering wheel, how will our legal and cultural institutions protect that necessary friction without accidentally leaving the door wide open to actual physical danger?
That is the big question.
Yeah, I mean, if we can no longer agree on the basic definition of what constitutes a call to violence, how do we ensure the vehicle of democracy doesn't drive itself right off the cliff in an era of such extreme political polarization?
It is the defining question of modern political discourse, and Reinhardt's essay suggests we are rapidly running out of time to find the answer.
And that is where we will have to leave it for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the definitions, look closely at the maps you're given, and we'll see you next time.